He said I was never meant to be anything, right before tossing me onto the street like I was yesterday's trash. That was the moment my life split in two. Before and after, innocence and exile, daughter and nothing. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Family Tales by Ethan so you never miss out on these fascinating stories. And let us know what you're watching today in the comments. I was 17 when my father, Robert Carter, sat at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee and pretending the morning paper mattered more than his own child. He didn't yell, he didn't lose his temper. No, he delivered my life's verdict like he was reading a weather report. You're not built for success, Emma. You're the extra, the backup plan. Your brother is the future of this family. He lifted his eyes slowly, almost bored. You're just here. For years I'd felt like a ghost wandering through someone else's home. My older brother Jason was the golden child of suburban Michigan. Star quarterback, straight-A student, college-bound hero. He had the Lakeview bedroom, the shiny car gifted on his 16th birthday, parents who clapped at every breath he took, and me, hand-me-downs, curfews that weren't enforced on him, and suspicious eyes every time I dared exist too loudly. At 15, I got a job bussing tables at Pete's Diner. I brought home tips and crumpled dollar bills, fingers smelling like syrup and bleach. I thought maybe they'd notice how hard I tried. I held decent grades. I stayed out of trouble. I even tutored Jason in calculus when he started slipping. But my mother, Linda, still called me lazy when I slept past 8 after late shifts. My dad accused me of lacking ambition when I mentioned culinary school. Trade dreams for a real future, he said, shaking his head like I was a disappointment he'd been forced to tolerate. And Jason? He smirked. Always smirked, like my suffering was some private entertainment meant only for him. But nothing changes a family faster than a lie, and nothing stabs deeper than believing loyalty is a test you can pass, only to find out it was never graded. Fairly, it was the summer before senior year when Jason wrapped his new Dodge Challenger around a pole after a party. I found him first, drunk, bleeding, terrified. He grabbed my wrist, eyes wild. Don't tell them, please, they'll kill me. He was crying. Not pretty little sobs, the kind that shake a person. I didn't think. I just protected him, like an idiot. I stood in that living room the next morning, shaking, and told them I'd taken the car without permission. I thought maybe loyalty meant something. Maybe they'd look at me differently. Maybe I'd finally earn a place in the home I lived in but never belonged to. Instead, my dad pointed toward the door without emotion. Pack your things. You've embarrassed this family enough. It was so quiet. My heartbeat sounded like thunder in my ears. I expected yelling, at least a conversation. Some acknowledgement that I was 18 months from adulthood and fragile as a matchstick. But there was just disappointment. Cold, surgical, final. I spent that night in a bus shelter, my backpack as a pillow, my $12 emergency money tucked in my shoe so no one could steal it. The wind cut through me like I didn't belong in the world at all. By morning, when I crept back to grab my school bag, I found a trash bag of clothes tossed on the porch. There was a note taped to it. You're on your own now. Learn something from this. I stood there barefoot on the concrete, clutching that note like it was proof I hadn't dreamed any of it. They hadn't checked on me. Not one text, not one call. My mother told people at church I chose the streets to rebel. 2 weeks later, Jason posted beach pictures from Florida like nothing happened. I kept breathing because my body didn't know how to stop. I worked double shifts at a convenience store. Slept on cardboard behind stock shelves when the manager didn't see. Showered at the YMCA. Ate discount sandwiches and stale donuts. Learned that quiet can feel like knives when you have no one to hear your voice. 3 years of silence. 3 years of learning to build myself from scraps. Community college. Library Wi-Fi. Freelance marketing gigs until I could afford a studio apartment. Then eventually an actual business. Clients who believed in me. A name that meant something. A billboard off Route 6 with my face and the words, "Local Entrepreneurs Rising." I stood on the sidewalk the day it went up, tears freezing on my cheeks, whispering to teenage me, "You made it. You exist." And then my phone buzzed. A single text from my mother. "Is that you on the billboard?" 2 hours later came the calls. Then voicemails. Then relatives suddenly fascinated by how I'd been. Every message sticky sweet and rotten underneath. They didn't miss me. They missed access. I didn't answer. The silence worked both ways now, until the knock. One quiet evening, headlights flashed across my driveway, and I saw the old silver Honda Civic I used to dread hearing pull in at night. My mother stood on my porch holding a Tupperware of banana bread, smiling like we were old friends. "Oh, honey, you look wonderful." I looked at her the way you'd look at a stranger wearing a familiar costume. "Why are you here?" Her smile trembled just a bit. "Well, Jason and Emily are struggling. They lost their apartment, and the baby's coming soon. We thought maybe you could help, just until they get back on their feet. You always talked about having a spare room." The bitter taste in my mouth wasn't anger. It was realization. They had never come for me. They came for space, security, survival mine. I stood very still. The porch light flickered between us. "You threw me out with a trash bag and a note," I said softly. "And now you want a place to stay?" She blinked. "It was complicated back then." "No," I whispered. "It was convenient." She drew breath, maybe to guilt me, maybe to disguise regret with authority, but I was already turning the doorknob. She spat her last card. "You're being selfish." I looked at her then, not with hate but with clarity. "No, I'm just done being useful only when you need something." The door clicked shut. My heart slammed like a fist inside my ribs. That night, guilt crept in. Old habits die slow. The doubt whispered, "What if you're wrong? What if you're cruel?" But I remembered the silence, the cold, the trash bag, and I slept, really slept, for the first time in years. Grief comes in strange shapes. Sometimes it looks like a memory you don't want but can't forget. Sometimes it looks like strength you didn't know you had. And sometimes it looks like a quiet morning. Sunlight hitting the hardwood floors of a house you earned yourself, and realizing they can't hurt you anymore unless you open the door. But the universe wasn't done testing me. I thought silence would be enough. Ignore the texts, ignore the voicemails, let their sudden affection fade into whatever void it came from. But pain has a way of circling back when it feels unfinished, and there's always someone in a broken family willing to stir the pot. I didn't rage post. I didn't seek revenge. I just wanted peace. Instead, an aunt, one who hadn't spoken to me since high school, messaged me on Facebook. "You know, it would really mean a lot to the family if you stepped up right now." Stepped up. That phrase squeezed around my ribs like a fist. Where were they when I was sleeping on cardboard in a stockroom? When I counted coins for instant ramen? When Christmas passed like a ghost because I had no one to wish me joy? Family. They loved that word when it benefited them. I didn't respond. But life wasn't done pushing. A week later, their car sat across from my driveway again, like a threat wrapped in nostalgia. Only this time it was my father. The same man who once stood unshakable at that kitchen table now looked brittle, like life had sanded him down. He didn't say hello. He didn't say I'm sorry. He said, "Your grandmother asked to see you." My breath froze. My grandmother, Grace Carter, had been the only person who ever looked me in the eyes like I mattered. When my parents shoved me out, she had whispered, "My door is always open, darling." But pride made me stay away. I'd thought loneliness was safer than love that could be taken. I saw her 2 days later. She sat in her sunlit living room, knitting, her silver hair tied in a loose bun. She smiled when she saw me, soft, warm, like the world slowed down just for us. "You grew into yourself," she whispered, pressing her palm against mine. "I always knew you would." I told her everything, about the billboard, about them showing up, about the ache of being remembered only when convenient. She listened, her eyes deep and steady, not shocked but sad. "They don't know what they lost," she murmured. "But you do, and that's why you won." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until tears burned my eyes. A week later, she died, quietly, gently, holding my hand in my own home like she trusted it to be her last safe place. I didn't cry right away. I just sat beside her and breathed, because grief sometimes feels like remembering how to exist without someone who made you believe you deserved to. She left me more than memories. She left a sealed wooden box and a letter addressed in her careful handwriting, to the granddaughter they never saw. Inside were journal entries. From when I was 9, 11, 14. When I thought no one saw me breaking quietly in corners, someone did. She documented everything. The bruises Jason claimed I caused, the lies my mother spread, the scared girl who tried so hard to be good enough. Proof. Not for them, but for me. And beneath it all, a deed transfer for her house. Signed. Notarized. Mine, Grandma gave me a legacy they tried to deny me. Her funeral was small because peace isn't loud, and love doesn't need a crowd to prove it exists. Friends, co-workers, neighbors who brought casseroles to my porch when I first moved in. People who chose me. People who didn't require proof. But even funerals are fair game for entitlement. My mother appeared, black dress pressed, sorrow pinned to her face like jewelry. Jason hovered by the gate, hands in pockets. That same smirk wilted into something dull. After the service, she approached, eyes darting around the garden my grandmother planted last spring. Lavender, rosemary, white lilies. Beauty she nurtured to the end, is it true? Mom asked, her voice stiff. Did she leave it all to you? I didn't flinch. Yes. Her mouth tightened like she tasted bitterness. She didn't cry for her mother. She mourned what she didn't get to claim. That night, they left a letter on my porch, formal, typed, signed, request for temporary accommodation while we recover and transition. They wanted to move into the very home my grandmother built as sanctuary, the home they abandoned her in when she defended me. They wanted comfort from the person they once discarded like leftover trash. I sat with that letter for a long time. I could have ignored it. I could have burned it. Instead, I answered in the same cold politeness they believed was power. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Carter, thank you for your interest in the residence at 14 Willow Bend Road. At this time, all rooms are occupied by peace, dignity, and long-earned silence. We are unable to accommodate guests who abandon these values. May you find shelter in the homes built by your choices. Kindly, Emma Carter. I printed it. I sealed it. I posted it online. Not out of malice, but truth. The truth deserves sunlight, and the world recognized itself in my story. Not every person gets justice. Not every black sheep wins. But sometimes the spare becomes the foundation. Messages flooded in. People who'd walked the same lonely path. Kids forgotten until they became successful enough to remember. Adults who fought their way out of houses where love was conditional and belonging was a privilege granted only to favorites. I wasn't alone. And neither were they, and then 3 days later I saw him again. Not my father. Jason. Outside a coffee shop, varsity jacket still clinging to shoulders that once carried arrogance like armor. He looked hollow. The sort of empty that happens when reality finally keeps its promises. You think you're better than me now? He hissed. I didn't answer. 'Cause sometimes silence is a mirror. Sometimes the truth hurts more when spoken back to you through quiet. He stepped close, breath bitter. You survived, didn't you? You got your house, your business, your precious success story. So what are you crying about? I looked at him. Not the boy who smirked when I broke, but a man who never learned how to build anything that didn't require stepping on someone else. You lied, I said gently, and I still rose. That's what eats you, his face twisted. But I wasn't there to fight. I'd done my fighting alone years ago in the dark when no one saw. I walked away. For the first time, he didn't follow. That night, I planted a white rose bush in my garden. Rebirth. For her. For me. For every invisible kid who bloomed where no one expected. And as I watered the soil, I whispered to the ghost of the girl I'd been. You were never the spare. You were the seed. People don't come back to apologize. They come back to collect. That's the sentence that sat in my chest in the days after I planted that rose. It repeated in my head as sunlight slid through window blinds, as emails from clients buzzed my phone, as I walked past framed certificates and the note my parents once left taped to a trash bag. You're on your own now. Learn something from this. I had learned to survive alone. I learned to build without them. And I learned that some people only remember your name. When your success becomes a lighthouse, they want to use as their own rescue beacon. For weeks after the funeral, I didn't hear from them. Silence again, familiar, haunting, but this time not painful. Not a wound, just quiet. A quiet I earned. A quiet I cherished. A quiet I refused to surrender. Until one evening in early fall when the world smelled like wood smoke and drying leaves, there was a knock at my door. I almost didn't answer, but intuition tugged at me, gentle at first, then stronger. I opened it, and standing there, hands shaking slightly, was my father. Not the cold man who threw me out, not the confident suburban patriarch whose voice once filled every room. He stood smaller, shoulders lowered, sweater worn thin around the elbows, eyes dull like time had rinsed the sharpness from them. And in his hands, not a banana bread container, not a guilt offering, but paperwork. He held them out without speaking. Stack of legal documents, deeds, transfers, signatures. "I'm signing over the house," he murmured, barely audible. "Your grandmother wanted you to have it, said, you earned it more than we ever did." There was no pride in his voice, no self-importance, just resignation. And something else, something thin, fragile, almost human. I didn't touch the papers. I simply watched him. Why now? My voice didn't shake. Why do this? He swallowed. For the first time, he didn't look like a figure towering over me. He looked like a man standing in the rubble of everything he once believed he controlled. "She was sick," he said quietly. "She didn't want you to know. Said you deserved peace. But she asked me to do this. Before she passed." The air felt heavy, like the sky was pressing down. My throat tightened, not for him, but for her. For the woman who held me together when the world tried to scatter me like dust. "Cancer," he whispered. "Stage 4. My knees weakened, but I didn't sit. I just breathed slow and steady, gripping the doorframe like it was a root holding me to the earth. The world didn't crumble, but the idea of it trembled. "I'm sorry," he added at last, voice cracking at the edges. "For everything." I let the apology hang between us. Not accepted, not rejected, just existing. Late, hollow, insufficient, but real in a way I never expected from him. We sat on my porch bench, silent, no screaming, no accusations. Just two people bound by blood and broken history, sharing a moment that didn't fix anything but acknowledged what couldn't be undone. 3 weeks later, I held her hand as she took her final breath. She chose my house, my safe space, to leave the world. I brushed her hair back from her forehead, whispered that I loved her, and promised I'd plant something new every spring. Loss didn't feel sharp. It wasn't violent. It was soft. A quiet ache that settled into my bones. She didn't break me. She steadied me. And when she left, she did it knowing I could stand on my own. After the funeral, small, simple, honest, my parents hovered at the edge like shadows, unsure if they belonged to the scene. My mother approached at last, gaze drifting across the garden, across the people who showed up not out of obligation but out of choice. "Is it true she left? Everything to you?" she asked. Yes, no explanation, no justification. The truth didn't owe her softness. That night, the typed request showed up. Polite language masking entitlement. A request to temporarily reside in the home where they once pretended I didn't exist. They wanted healing and comfort, they wrote. They wanted family unity. They wanted access to the peace I bled for. I answered like a stranger would, like someone whose heart was no longer a door they could walk in and out of. I didn't rage. I didn't beg. I didn't break. I published my letter, and the world saw a story many wished they had the courage to tell. Not vengeance, truth. Not bitterness, boundary. Not cruelty, closure. Virality wasn't the win. Validation wasn't the reward. The real victory was standing in a house where love lived, where silence was peaceful instead of punishing, where I knew, without doubt, I belonged. But the world wasn't finished testing me. Not yet. A few days later, I was in my garden trimming lavender when a car pulled into my driveway. Slow, hesitant, familiar. Jason stepped out, not swaggering, not smirking. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his eyes sunken like sleep had become a stranger. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I lost everything," he said. "Alyssa left. Took the baby. I messed up. I said nothing. I always thought." He paused, swallowing hard. "If I had what you had now, success, independence, I'd be happy. But you earned it, and I wasted everything given to me. So I figured maybe." He looked at the house, at the windows glowing warm behind me, at the garden I built with sweat and soil and stubborn hope. Maybe you could spare a room. I stared at him, not with anger, not with pity, with recognition of who he chose to be and who I chose not to become. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't monologue. I simply said what I wished someone had said to me long ago. You need to learn something from this. And I closed the gate. Not slammed. Closed. Because closure isn't violence. It's peace refusing to leave its own home. I walked back to the garden, hands shaking not from fear, but from release. I planted another rose beside the first, pink this time, renewal. And as the soil swallowed the roots, I whispered, not to him, not to them, but to the girl who once slept in a bus shelter with $12 and a trash bag. You didn't just survive. You inherited yourself. I didn't become who they wanted. I became who they weren't capable of seeing. And sometimes, the spare doesn't become the engine. Sometimes the spare becomes the whole vehicle.